Well, good morning to you, and thank you so much for choosing NTV Uganda to turn on your world. Now, speaking of turning on your world, we have a very fundamental conversation that we want to have alongside you for this hour regarding torture. Now, you may be asking yourself, torture, what does it mean, and who qualifies to be a victim of torture? What are the forms of torture? And others could actually be saying, yeah, we have had and seen and experienced torture all through the course of your different life's experiences, but nothing has been done from where you are seated. Well, I trust that this conversation this morning is going to change that. Why? Because torture is a crime as well as a violation against human rights, and there has been growing interest by the general public in combating torture using the relevant information communication technologies that do exist, such as the phones that we hold every single day in our hands, that have the ability to actually showcase what happens in our societies, what are the realities in our communities. Now, Uganda, of course, has taken essential steps towards guaranteeing this freedom, though more still needs to be done in attaining the realization of this freedom. Now, of course, every single year on the 26th of June, which is tomorrow, the world will be observing the United Nations International Day in support of victims of torture. And this is dedicated to continued awareness raising, supporting victims, as well as accountability. So it is against this background that we do have the Uganda Human Rights Commission. We also do have the Coalition Against Torture in Uganda and the African Center for Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture Victims coming together on one platform under one umbrella to jointly put out the message, advocate for the message and the theme for this year, torture-free communities for all. And that conversation is going to be starting right now. So at the end of the day, we hope that the take-home for you is in understanding the roles that each one of us play, state actors and non-state actors, in combating torture in our beloved Uganda. I am Priscilla Regina Naloga, and I'll be your host for this dialogue. Now, of course, it's being brought to you by the Uganda Human Rights Commission, the Coalition Against Torture in Uganda, and the African Center of Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture Victims. Be able to follow up on it as you stream live on Facebook as well as YouTube. And on Twitter, you can find the hashtag and the links accordingly. Torture-free communities. Is it possible? Well, I believe that the guests that I have with me in studio this morning can paint us a picture of the possibility, tracing the footsteps of the past and how we've been able to fight torture, combat torture, but also what are the realities on ground. So to my immediate left, I am joined by Mr. Nsubuga Samuel Herbert, who is the CEO with the African Center for Treatment and Rehabilitation of Tortured Victims. And then next to him, we do have Afande Ruth Chinti, who's the Senior Superintendent Directorate of Chief Political Commissariat, joining us for these conversations. I'm going to allow these two guests give their salutations, then we get into our discourse. However, later on, we're also going to be joined by Councillor Bernard Owondo, who's the President with the Uganda Law Society. To my immediate left, Mr. Nsubuga, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Fine, how are you?
Very good. Afande Chinti.
Hello, dear. Good morning. Hello, viewers. Good morning. I salute you all as we combat torture. We want to have a free society, free of torture by all and for all. Thank you.
Okay, all right. I'm going to start with Mr. Nsubuga here in asking for your definition of what qualifies a torture or other cruel, inhumane and degrading treatments or punishments in Uganda.
Torture is inflicting excruciating pain, both physical and mental, to a person by an individual or individuals. And torture is intentional. It's by purpose. It's not an accident. And we, in addition to that, we can say that torture can there is one when it's a lawful sanction, then it's not torture. And we, in addition to the ingredients of torture, there is what we, according to the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act, which was passed in 2012, we included the elements of cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment and punishment, because at some instances the ingredients may not get up to torture, to take care of also those human rights violations. And torture can really it has both physical and psychological effects. And in that case, in the work we do, where the African Center for Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture Victims treats and rehabilitates survivors of torture, we have a diverse human resource in order to deal with both the physical and psychological effects. We have doctors, clinical psychologists, and we also have social workers, physiotherapists, and nurses. But we also have legal officers, because what happens is that in order for the survivors of torture to access justice, we develop medical legal reports which are utilized by the Uganda Human Rights Commissions in terms of compensation for the survivors of torture, and also the courts of law in order to access justice by utilizing the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act.
Okay.
Which, yes.
All right, thank you so much. So let me turn to Afande Chintu. From where you stand, of course, law and order is paramount in ensuring that we curb torture in Uganda. However, from the books of law, how is it defined from you? And I ask this because so many times people will go to, for example, the police. They will report cases. And the people at that office, or the police themselves, how they respond to these reports being brought in is also quite torturing, if I must say. Like, no, you must have provoked him. No, you must have done something to deserve this kind of punishment. Let's talk about it from your lenses.
Thank you so much. We all stand to condemn torture. And I'm standing here for the Commandant Professional Standards Unit, a department or unit in the police force that specially handles torture-related cases. And as an institution, we stand against torture, and at no time has the police force condoned acts of torture. True, a torture victim can want to enter a case at any police because torture is criminal, and the mandate of the police is to receive and investigate crime. However, at times you go to a police station and you really get more traumatized. And I want our viewers to understand that any of us are potential victims. And it is not only the police officers who torture or who allegedly torture, even the general public, our parents, the nannies in our homes, mob justice, we see instances of mob justice, so any person can inflict torture, which is criminal. However, when it comes to reporting to a police station, true, some of our officers may not have the courtesy of welcoming this victim to handle them the way they should be handled, register case, take their particulars and statements. However, as a police force, in line with our partners like the African Center and other stakeholders, we are doing so much in training and sensitizing our officers to receive torture victims like they can receive any other complainant, to see that we combat torture and not inflict further torture. When it comes to our own officers, yes, it may be tricky to report a police officer at the very station where he works. We have comradeship, we are human beings. It may be tricky. However, that's why at the headquarters and at the regions, we have PSU. We have PSU at headquarters and at the regions where errant police officers can ably be handled, reported, investigated, and reprimanded.
All right, thank you so much. We're now joined on this conversation set with Councillor Bernard Owundo, who's the president of the Uganda Law Society. I'm going to allow him his salutations and then we'll pick it up from there.
Good morning to you. Thank you for hosting me here today this morning and to speak about the theme for this year, torture-free communities. I'm happy to be here to contribute to this conversation. Okay.
Now, picking up on the submissions of Mr. Nsubuga here and Afande Chintu, I know that this conversation, again, also has to operate around the legalities and the frameworks that do exist within the confinements of Uganda and its constitutions. Talk to us about these frameworks and the policies and regulations that currently exist. One, of course, to protect. Of course, there's also compensation, something that Mr. Nsubuga talked about, but also to prevent in the first place.
Yes. So I think the fundamental framework we have is the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda, which expressly states in Article 24, freedom from torture and cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment. So you have that Article 24 which provides the framework for freedom from torture. But more importantly, you have Article 44 of the Constitution that provides you cannot derogate from those rights. So in the Constitution you have Article 44 that clearly provides for whatever you do, you should not torture any victim. So arising out of those provisions, we then have what we call the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act. That is the act that details the definition of torture, which my good friend Mr. Subuga has been able to elaborate, that details what happens, where do you complain to, which courts have jurisdiction, and all the other issues. But I think more importantly also, we also have the International Convention Against Torture, which Uganda has ratified. I think it's important to say that Uganda is a signatory to the International Convention Against Torture. So from the picture of the way you look at it, we have a sufficient framework to deal with torture. We also have a sufficient framework to deal with how you complain. We also have a sufficient framework to deal with compensation, restitution, and all these issues that deal with torture. But also more importantly, you have courts' decisions that have also been able to explain and say, you know, if someone is tortured, it's important they are compensated. And we have we have about 4 or 5, I think 2 court decisions that have come up in the last 2 years on torture. So I think it's important to state that that is the constitutional framework and the legal framework that we have for the freedom against torture. All right.
Mr. Nsubuga, with the African Center, I know that you have qualified and, you know, come out with some forms that do qualify to be stated as torture or inhuman treatment as well as punishment. Talk to us about those, because I know that in our audience there's someone who's eating to find out if what they are experiencing could qualify as torture.
Okay, in addition to having the enactment of the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act in 2012, we felt it extremely important to also have regulations of the law, so that it helps in the stakeholders to operationalize the law and to help in its implementation. So in 2017, the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture regulations were gazetted. But furthermore, we have just concluded an exercise where the Office of the Directorate of Public Prosecutions and the Uganda Police CID department have developed a checklist to help in effective documentation of torture cases, because we felt it's important, because in order for a perpetrator to be prosecuted conclusively and convicted, we have to have foolproof evidence. So the issues of providing evidence which is foolproof, it's extremely important that we have the forms which can help in that work. So we are due to launch that checklist to help our partners, the police and the ODPP, effectively document cases of torture, because unfortunately we have not really had successful convictions of perpetrators of torture, and I mean the torture is still prevalent, but we need to get some examples of people punished and prosecuted so that it helps in mitigating the torture in this country. Okay,
do we have privy to that checklist so far, or we have to wait for when it's officially released?
It's actually we just need to publish it, but otherwise it's ready. It's ready.
So you can tell us some of the elements that appear on the checklist?
Basically, it's really to ensure that when one comes, for example, now, like when one comes, reports to the police the issues of getting proper, for example, now, like in our case, because of our medical legal reports, you have to make sure you have a photograph, or to make sure that the bruises are highlighted, And for us now, like in our case, we have, because there are also psychological effects of torture, the report by the clinical psychologist being part of the part of the documentation, and all these, of course, being shared with the police, and also, and then when it goes to the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, it makes sense for the courts of law to make sure that they get a conviction.
All right. Yeah. I'm glad that order and law are seated together for this conversation. I found it into, when it comes to reporting, receiving these victims or those that are related to the victims coming to report the crimes and the humane things that have been done to people in our society, how do you ensure that this is qualified as torture in your report receipt?
Thank you. As police, our duty, cardinal duty, is to enforce law and order. So it is imperative upon us to know at the counter, the officers who sit at the counter normally have a CID detective. When a complaint comes, normally they come generally, and it is the CID detective at the counter who has senses and can really think this complaint is in line with this act. So at the entrance, a complaint is made in line with the law that provides for that offense. It is entered. If it is basically complaint against any other member of the public, like I said, it is not very easy to have a police officer regularly investigated at the very station where he has allegedly committed torture. However, when a case of torture has come against any other member or mob justice, or we have seen a clip on the video and we identify the area, we open a file. We are normally guided, our general officers at the station are guided by the CIDs who are well versed with these laws. When a complaint is received, it is taken to the OCCID, he or she allocates it, and investigations commence.
When you say investigations commence, at what point do they commence? Can it be a one-time reporting of a case, or it has to be a repeated, maybe 2 to 3 times for it to be qualified to then have an investigation opened up?
Thank you so much. Of late, like we've intimated in the beginning, we are using so much ICT, or information communication technology, as our source of information regarding crime generally and torture in particular. It may be a phone call. A person receives a phone call at the counter and he enters it. It may be a physical person who is a victim or who is not a victim, because the law allows any other person. It is the duty of every person to report torture. So this person who physically moves to the station may not necessarily be the victim. So we don't have to wait for real occurrence of alleged torture. The moment we have a hint that torture is being committed somewhere, it is just enough for us to make an entry. We don't have to wait for repeated stuff, for maybe so many phone calls, just a mere hint. Just watching on TikTok or whatever social media platform you are on and you sense there is torture, we are very quick at identifying the place and we are very quick at making an entry. So it doesn't have to be recurrent. It is just a hint.
Councillor Wunda, Mr. Nsubuga here notes that one of the things that downplays their work that they're doing is the fact that there's been minimal convictions through the corridors of law to ensure that the perpetrators are brought to justice. What challenges have led to this kind of situation?
Well, I think that there have been convictions, and I've certainly seen a couple of decisions where the judges have come out very strongly on torture, including even instances where the court will actually state that where a person has been tortured, you cannot get a conviction. I think that is very important for us to be able to understand. The courts have even gone ahead to say that evidence should not be used as a defense, to say that when someone goes to court and then you're going to ask the person who has gone to court for evidence, the courts are saying that usually in such situations you cannot be able to get evidence. So they are saying you cannot ask a person who has been tortured for evidence. I think that these are progressive decisions that help the fight against torture. But I think the point that we need to make here, and I want to pick up from my sister here, Fande, who has stated that it takes all of us When you hear about it, don't sit back.
Yeah.
Don't say because my neighbor is being tortured, that is not my concern. You have an obligation under the law to report. So it is important that people understand that wherever you are, you have an obligation to report acts of torture. If we all can play our part, then we can be able to win the fight against torture, and we can have torture-free communities. Remember, the theme is torture-free communities. We are talking about communities. So we are saying as a community, wherever you hear about torture, please be able to report. I think number 2 for me is the fact that these rights are interrelated. So today you can't talk about torture and then you don't talk about people being held in ungazetted places. There's a relationship. If you hold someone in an ungazetted place, and you'll see from the court decisions that we have been able to see, it starts from being held in an ungazetted place. And then in that ungazetted place, that is where the torture takes place. So we need to understand that all these rights, the human rights under Chapter 4 of the Constitution, are interrelated. And for us to successfully win against torture, then we should speak also against other rights. The right for someone not to be held beyond 48 hours, the right for you to be held in a gazetted place, the right to be informed of the charge which you have been, which you're being arrested for, the right to be given access to a lawyer. So these rights are interrelated. So I think that this discussion helps us to be able to reach that objective of having torture-free communities. I think when you have gone to the courts have been very clear. Someone is tortured, no conviction. If you have been tortured, there is compensation, there is restitution. I think they're giving from the cases that I have seen, between 100, 300 million Uganda shillings for compensation, depending on the nature of the torture that you have suffered. So I think that there are progressive steps. We need to see more, but you see sometimes the victims cannot report. So the challenge is on because the court can only determine what comes to it. So I think a lot of what we have to do is in sensitizing our people to know that actually you can actually go to court, and court can actually compensate you for torture.
All right, there's sensitizing of our public, but there's also need to ensure that the entities, especially in public service, that are supposed to be supporting this issue and making sure that we have communities that are free of torture, empowered and funded to do so. Because I know that many of the discussions that we have, it always comes down to we don't have money to support the human resource needed to have as much deployment across the nation to be able to then receive these reports, act on them. On the judiciary side, it will be the same thing. Human resource is limited in order to be able to address this issue in a timely manner. So that is why we're going to be leaving it. I know that you do have your 2 cents, your questions and comments on these conversations. Be able to share them across our social media platforms, NTV Uganda, and right after this break, we'll continue the conversation. Do stay with us.
Are you an MSME looking to break barriers and accelerate your growth? Join us at the MSME Symposium, proudly brought to you by Nation Media Group in collaboration with the Federation of Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises Uganda, scheduled for June 27th, 2024 at the prestigious Hotel Africana, Nile Hall. This year's theme, Breaking Barriers for MSMEs Acceleration, a day dedicated to empowering micro, small and medium enterprises. Gain insights from industry leaders, network with fellow entrepreneurs, and discover innovative strategies to drive your business forward. Engage in panel discussions, hands-on workshops, and interactive sessions designed to tackle the unique challenges faced by MSMEs. Don't miss this opportunity to connect, learn, and grow. For partnership and registration, call Wilfred on 0774 706 217. Brought to you by Nation Media Group in collaboration with the Federation of Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises Uganda. Together, we accelerate success. Follow the conversation using the hashtag MSME Acceleration 2024.
On the next episode is brought to you by
Boom Chakala! Boom Chiki! Boom Chakala!
On the next episode,
today's episode is a very special one. We are about to jump onto a time machine and go back in time. I think you can see this lovely specimen. This is one of the first, actually it is the first Ford car to be in Uganda. There are so many wonderful things to see here at the Uganda Museum.
We have this ambulance. It is very unique. It has been in existence before the coming of the Europeans. Culture is the way of life of our people. So these are objects of different cultures in northern Uganda. Ideally, pottery making was done by ladies.
Love you.
On the next episode...
Boom Chakala! Grab a Rock Boom, check under the cap, energize and win smartphones, flat screen TVs, Rock Boom gear, motorbikes and millions. I mean millions of cash. What you see is what you win. Boom Chiki! Boom Chakala!
Have torture-free communities for all and by all? Well, I believe that somewhere, somehow, we are getting to the bottom of that question as we continue on with this conversation in line with the observancy of the United Nations International Day in support of victims of torture. My guests, of course, I do have Mr. Samuel Habat-Nsubuga, who is the CEO with the African Center for Treatment and Rehabilitation of Tortured Victims. We also do have Councillor Bernard Owundo, who is the president with the Uganda Law Society. We are also joined by Afande Ruth Chintu, who's a superintendent directorate with police, giving us their 2 cents on the matter and what our responsibility is at the end of the day, because torture is indeed a crime, as Afande Ruth did make mention of it. Now we want to turn our attention to some of the reports that have come out. There's the 25th report and the 26th report, particularly on the state of human rights in Uganda. And Mr. Nsubuga, you having been privy to this report, I would like to hear from you some highlights of situations as well as incidences or realities that have continued to manifest themselves in our communities.
Thank you very much, Regina. Unfortunately, torture is still prevalent, and it is still, the cases unfortunately are still going up, and we have realized that in addition to the security agencies, but even the communities perpetrating torture. And so that's why this theme is basically not only to create awareness to not only the stakeholders, the security agencies, but even all the communities, to know about torture, to know where to report. And we have what we unfortunately now in our instance of the African Center for Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture Victims, after treating and rehabilitating survivors of torture, there is a lot of fear to when we want to have them access justice. There is a lot of fear because there is no witness protection law. Would like a witness protection bill to be passed into law. It's actually it's there, but it just needs to be passed into law, so that the survivors of torture can come to the witness stand and speak out, mm-hmm. and even in camera to bring out the issues, so that the perpetrators of torture can be dealt with. So there is that challenge. Mm-hmm. There is that challenge of people coming out they come out to be treated and rehabilitated, but the issues of following through cases is still a challenge. And secondly, we also need to have the legal aid bill passed into law, because most of these survivors of torture are economically disadvantaged. They cannot afford to get a lawyer privately. So that is also still with Parliament. Mm. And in addition to that, in order to prevent to mitigate torture occurrences, there is what they call the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture. We are recommending the Uganda Human Rights Commission to be the national preventive mechanism as the autonomous body to help in the prevention of torture. So when this OPCAT is ratified by the state, it will allow other national and international agencies to have access to the detention centers. Currently, it's only the Uganda Human Rights Commission which has access to all the detention centers unannounced. And in addition to that, we need more resources to the Uganda Human Rights Commission because issues of human resource, issues of activities of civic awareness, which is part of their mandate, even visiting, even currently, they are not in a position to visit the thousands of prisons and detention centers because they do not have the resources. Okay. Even the issues of the tribunal hearings, which are part of their mandate in order to award compensation to survivors, all those activities are suffering. So it's extremely important that the resources for the Uganda Human Rights Commission are enhanced.
Okay, let's talk about strides that are being taken. Let me turn to you, Council Wondered. Some of the things that Mr. Nsubuga here has pointed out, you do have the Witness Protection Bill, the design of it, and the Legal Aid Bill also that require your input. Of course, it's the Uganda Law Society. Where do we stand on that?
No, I think these bills are before Parliament. As Uganda Law Society, we have continuously said and spoken that we need the Witness Protection Bill quickly passed. We have also spoken on the Legal Aid Bill. As you know, the Uganda Law Society is the biggest legal aid services provider in the country. So these bills are important for us to be able to support legal aid. So I think I agree with Mr. Nsubuga that it's important that this legislation, supporting legislation, is dealt with. And I think the two key issues that I think I would like to add on, I think are two major issues for us to be able to move on this freedom against torture. One is to ensure that investigations are done. Very important that investigations are done. But also number two, those who perpetrate torture are held accountable. I think as long as you see that those who perpetrate torture are not being held accountable, then you realize that it just continues, because everyone says, after all, they'll do nothing to me. So I think that we need to ensure that investigations are done, especially where you have public officers or security agencies participating in torture. It's important that investigations are done. And I think we have not seen more of that. And that is the major issue. So you're moving well on the legislation, but the question is the action and the implementation.
Right.
Yeah. Can you actually put these laws into force so that people can see that if I am got for torture, I will be held accountable.
Okay. Yeah. Afande Chintu, this is where you come in as a state actor in this conversation, prevention and protection from torture and other cruel as well as inhumane treatments and punishments. You cannot have 100% to do your work. That reality we do know. But I know that in one way or another, I'm sure you've taken strides and steps towards better performance in that regard. Talk to us about that.
Thank you so much. I would humbly want to disagree with my two brothers. The fact that we don't publicly publish what we do as police does not mean that we don't do anything or we haven't done much in as far as having perpetrators of torture brought to book. As a police force, we have a report launched in February by PSU. We have thousands of cases registered. I also wish to inform our viewers that we don't only handle cases related to torture as police. We generally handle human rights violation cases, and we receive thousands of them. If you look at the report, which I cannot share now, but it's with the Commandant PSU, we have thousands of cases registered. We have thousands of cases investigated, successfully investigated, and we have so many of our officers prosecuted. Now, as a police force, once a case is registered against a human rights violation case or a torture-related case, or allegation brought against any police officer, the first immediate action we take is suspension. We suspend the officer to allow room for free and fair investigation without interruption or without influence from that officer. So the officers are suspended until investigations are complete. Upon investigation, as PSU or as a police force, we are not caught to decide and put away cases. After investigation, we forward our cases to the office of the DPP. When the office of the DPP appreciates the evidence on record, the officer perusing the file may prefer criminal charges, which we do institute. If they prefer disciplinary action, we have disciplinary courts, and thousands of our officers are before the disciplinary courts. Men have been dismissed, men have been reduced in rank, many have been fined. It's only that I don't think we are under that obligation to publicly, because our reports, first of all, the person with interest can pay for a police report, and the report is issued to them. So the fact that we don't publish whatever nitty-gritty we do does not mean that we don't act. However, when it comes to torture and other human rights violations, we really do as a police force, and we condemn any act contrary to human rights and torture violations. I also wish to note that cases of torture and human rights violations by people in uniform, especially in the police force, are widespread. It's not only Kampala Metropolitan, it is not only Masaka. So we have cases coming in across the entire country. You get isolated cases from Arua, you get one from Kabale, you get one from Nakaseke. So we handle them as they come in. Right now, since January to June this year, we have 34 cases actively being investigated by PSU of torture alone, not even other human rights violations. But as PSU, we do investigate other human rights violations, like council submitted human rights intertwined. You cannot say you're enjoying this, but you are limited in this. So as police, we handle it as a whole. So currently we have 34. And when it comes to gender, we have more cases reported against male officers than female. So we really do so much, and we have so many. We have had so many prosecuted and many convicted, and upon conviction, the police force dismisses the officer.
Okay. All right, Mr. Nsubuga, as a non-state actor, we would like to turn to you. I know that the coalition has definitely brought in some results, but at the end of the day, we want to see how we can sustain the action towards combating torture in order to attain the torture-free communities we are advocating for this year.
Yeah, we continue to train. We mainstreamed training of the state actors, including the police, the UPDF, the prison officers. We even train the media, because it's extremely important when the media sees an alleged torture case when they're out in the field, so that they know what to do to report. Even the health workers, we have a program where we are trying to increase our reach by having health workers and legal officers spread all over the country, because we are still the only torture treatment and rehabilitation center in the country, and we are just in 4 places: Kampala, Kasese, Kabong, the Karamoja sub-region, and Gulu. So we felt it's important that we have ambassadors from other from all the regions of the country to ensure that the issues of prevention of torture are raised, and if there are any torture occurrences, they are dealt with. So we continue to train both state and non-state actors, and we always, in fact, what happens is that during this period of June, before the commemoration, that's when we give more or less reminders to the public about these issues, torture, where to report and where to get services.
Okay. All right. Councillor Owundo, returning to you now. The observance of the United Nations, Day on this particular conversation, especially in support of victims of torture. You did mention earlier of the UN Convention Against Torture. What are the mandates for us as a signatory country, and then also in line with the theme that we are looking at, torture-free communities? How important is it that we have continued collaboration between state and non-state actors?
Thank you for your question. One, I think that there is no way we can have torture-free communities without the state actors and non-state actors working together. It requires collaboration. So it's important that we collaborate, the Office of the DPP, the Uganda Police, my friend Mr. Suga, and all the other state actors. It's important that we because no one likes torture, and no one should be able to condone torture. Thankfully, the Prohibition and Prevention of Torture Act is actually supposed to give effect to the UN Convention. So our obligations under the International Convention Against Torture have now been domesticated, what we call in law domesticated. So those obligations are there, and I think they have been well laid out here by the various speakers that we have today. So I think for me and going forward, I think we need to collaborate together. As I have stated, the rights are interrelated. So you will not say that we are only fighting against torture and yet we are holding people in ungazetted places. It's important that you have gazetted places, because once you have a gazetted place, then as lawyers we're able to go and see the victim or the person who has been taken to understand the situation in which they are. But once you have ungazetted places, then you sort of promote some of these acts. So it's important that even as we collaborate, we understand the key issues that we need to be able to deal with to continue the journey. Two, as we have stated, supported for accountability. Afande has made a good case here. Let's thank the Uganda Police for the efforts that they are doing in terms of handling. But it's important that these things are also done publicly. You see, when it is done publicly, then the other person knows that if I do it, this is the way it's going to go. So it's important that this information is also shared publicly, so that we can all appreciate the sort of movement that is going on in that direction. So I think as Uganda Law Society will continue to advocate together with other collaborators. We want to work with anyone who is interested, and I want to thank ACT for being able to bring most of us together to be able to speak against torture, and also thank all the other stakeholders who are contributing.
All right, Afande Shintu, in line with the theme for this year, how do you hope we'll be able to cope and maybe redesign some of the programs, awareness platforms that are there to be able to combat torture in our country?
Thank you so much. As a police force, we believe so much in community engagement. We have a fully fledged directorate where I come from, the Directorate of Chief Political Commissariat, and we have a Department of Community Policing. You and me agree that most of our people die in there because they don't come to speak up. Council intimated sometime that judiciary will only determine a matter brought before it. So if you keep quiet within your house, you rot out of the wounds inflicted upon you during torture, and you don't speak up, you may never get assistance. So as a police force, we are doing so much, every opportunity. I also take this particular opportunity to call upon the public. You and me can fight torture. As long as we speak up, let us be one another's guard. When you see some torture in the neighborhood, don't keep quiet. Be part and report, because some people may not be able to report, but you as an individual can help save that small girl, that small woman, that small man who is being tortured. As a police force, we call upon the community to be part in the fight against torture. We call upon fellow officers to join such celebrations, to join any drive that is anti-torture and human rights violation. And the police, and as a force, we call upon people to come up and speak. If the OC station or OC police booth where you are is not helping out, you can always run to the region. There is RPC. You can run to PSU. PSU has toll-free numbers. You can run everywhere. You can always speak. Even if you go to the area chairperson, you can get assistance. Don't sit back and die when service providers are there to help. I also want to make this other observation that some people may fake torture in the name of evading justice. Like at PSU, we normally receive cases when someone is to be convicted or when someone is to be paraded before court, they will come and make false allegations. I just call upon the public, let us fight torture. Let us not play around with this thing. If you know you've been on the wrong side of the law, just go and face justice. Don't feign. Because most of the cases, like Council said, most of the complaints we receive, some don't graduate into prosecution because the evidence is found to be false. So let us receive genuine torture cases and investigate them. Let us join together and have a community free from torture.
Mr. Nsubga, in an era that we do have information communication technologies such as phones, these gadgets have been very instrumental now more than ever in actually combating torture within our communities. We do have a case of one Shakira Nauda. She goes to church by her own choice, decision, and she gets to be flogged by her Muslim family for doing so. However, because of these ICT elements and tools, that was able to be brought to book. You do have so many cases of that. So they did talk about the ungazetted areas. Here on NTV, we read a story of a teenage girl who was in an ungazetted place, and this is a hospital, and she was there for 3 months. Why? Because she couldn't finish her hospital bills, and this is during COVID-19, and she was in that place against, and that was torture, of course, enough for them as a family. So you get to see that these are actual incidences that happen and re-happen on a daily basis. However, with the adoption of ICT in fighting torture in our communities, how do we then encourage the public to do as much as possible to be the voice, the ear and the eyes of torture?
Thank you very much. That's a very excellent question. That is why we were always intent on now, like being in on NTV space, the media, utilizing the media, sharing our contacts, all the stakeholders, where to report. I mentioned earlier that we also engage the media on issues of creating awareness about torture. So the issue is to urge the public to report these cases, and we have a toll-free line. We are also on social media, so reporting these cases, and then we follow it through. We have a program where we actually even visit people's homes. They do not need to come to our centers for treatment and rehabilitation. We have what we call home visits. So we can even go to a person's home and treat and rehabilitate the person from there. So the issue is to continue creating awareness about the services, both treatment and rehabilitation and even legal, so that we have our people access justice.
All right, as we come to the end of this discussion, I'm going to put my panelists on the spot. Torture-free communities for all. In your different capacities, you do have responsibilities to play towards this becoming a reality. It may not be today or tomorrow, but someday it can actually be a reality. So I would like to hear your call to action and your commitment towards this year's theme. Let me start with the Uganda Law Society.
As you know, the Uganda Law Society is mandated under the Uganda Law Society Act to promote rule of law and good governance. And in it, we promote what we call protection of human rights. And one of the most fundamental is the freedom from torture. As Uganda Law Society, we continue to live this commitment. And that is why we are here today, to continue to advocate. It is important to speak out. If we don't speak out, the vice continues. So as Uganda Law Society, we commit to continue to do what our mandate is under the Uganda Law Society Act and continue to speak against acts of torture. And we will continue to do this so that we can have torture-free communities.
Okay, all right. State Actor Police, and in relation to that, what activities have you designed in order to observe the day tomorrow?
Thank you so much. As a community department, a community policing department, we are invited and we are part of the celebrations tomorrow. We continue using the media platform wherever we get opportunity to speak against torture and to sensitize the communities. Then our officers, wherever they are champions of change in this drive, and we call upon all of them, wherever they are, police post, police booth, police station, to be champions and to be vessels through which the message and gospel of anti-torture can reach the communities. As a police force, as a law enforcement body, we commit and pledge our further commitment in the fight against torture. We are more than ready to fully investigate, receive, and handle cases of torture, whether by our own or whether by any member of society or in private individuals. We live to that commitment, and it is our prayer and commitment that one day we shall have a torture-free community.
Okay, all right. Mr. Nsubga, in your submissions, how are we as a country and collectively going to be observing this day and implementing that forth?
Yes, thank you very much. Tomorrow, we are going to commemorate the United Nations International Days Remembrance of Survivors of Torture by having a procession here in Kampala. And not only in Kampala, we also have activities in Kabong and Gulu, and the public is invited. And we are here at the Kampala Railway Grounds. There is actually going to be a pro bono legal aid clinic, a courtesy of the Uganda Law Society. So everyone is welcome, and we want to also only be with issues of torture. We also want to spread it out as Council Wound has said, that all these rights are interrelated. Maybe I should also mention that treatment and rehabilitation by services are also at no cost to the survivor of torture. We are going to have remarks by the torture survivors at the commemoration day, because really it's their day. Okay. So everyone is welcome.
All right.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, my panelists. And I trust that at the end of the day, one, you've been able to understand that there's ratification and signing of the UN Convention, which we, of course, subscribers to, against torture, passing of the Prevention and the Prohibition of Torture Act. That is also one of the frameworks that we do have here in Uganda in order for you to be the voice of the torture that's happening within your community. There's also the Directorate of Public Prosecution, the Uganda Human Rights Commission, all those platforms that you can be able to approach and put in your complaint. You also do have an enabling environment that has been mentioned by the state actors and the non-state actors that you can be able to approach in order to deal with and get the support needed as a torture victim. At the end of the day, an informed mind is an informed decision. We trust that we've been able to turn on your world of information with this discussion, and it brings this to the end. I am Priscilla Regina Nalwaga. You can always refer to our YouTube channel for a recap on this discussion and follow up accordingly. Otherwise, good afternoon.